grand hall of the Galactic Council glittered beneath the light of 1,000 worlds. Towering crystal pillars reflected the colors of distant galaxies, while massive windows overlooked the greatest engineering achievement in modern history, the Nexus Gate Network. Beyond the transparent walls, colossal rings of silver and blue energy pulsed to life as starships emerged from shimmering portals. Every arrival was greeted with cheers that echoed throughout the chamber. For the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy had become truly connected. No more months crossing the endless darkness between stars. No more isolated colonies waiting helplessly for aid. No more civilizations cut off by distance. A journey that once took half a year could now be completed in seconds. It was more than a transportation network. It was the beginning of a new age. Representatives from 17 member species filled the enormous hall, celebrating what many called the greatest accomplishment in Galactic Council history. Glasses were raised. Musicians from dozens of worlds performed together. Diplomats laughed as though centuries of political rivalry had never existed. For one night, the galaxy was united. Standing quietly near the observation window was Ambassador Do-Hyun. Unlike the joyful delegates around him, he wore no smile. His gray hair reflected the starlight outside, and years of diplomacy had left permanent lines of exhaustion around his eyes. For 20 years, he had represented Earth within these halls. He had survived political crises, border disputes, and countless negotiations. Tonight should have been the proudest moment of his career, because humanity had made this miracle possible. When the Council's greatest scientists declared the Nexus project impossible, it was human engineers who found the solution. When ancient alien reactors repeatedly failed, human physicists redesigned them. When construction stalled in the freezing emptiness between stars, human workers remained outside for weeks, building gateways where no civilization had dared to build before. Millions of human lives, decades of sacrifice. Countless sleepless nights. Every shimmering gate outside existed because humanity had refused to accept the word impossible. Yet as Do-Hyun watched the celebration, a strange feeling settled deep in his chest. Something wasn't right. He slowly scanned the room. Most delegates applauded the success, but not all of them. Several council members kept glancing toward him, not with gratitude, not with admiration, with something else, something colder, envy, suspicion, fear. Whenever Do-Hyun met their eyes, they quickly looked away. They whispered among themselves. Small conversations stopped the moment he approached. Smiles disappeared. Laughter faded. It reminded him of storms back on Earth. The sky often looked peaceful, right before lightning struck. A voice interrupted his thoughts. Beautiful, isn't it? Do-Hyun turned. Councillor Velkar, one of the oldest delegates in the assembly, stood beside him with a polite smile. His expression was warm. But his eyes were not. The Nexus gates will change the galaxy forever, Velkar said. They already have, Do-Hyun replied quietly. Velkar nodded. Yes. His gaze drifted toward the glowing gateways outside. And history always remembers the civilization that changes everything. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Velkar smiled again. This time, it felt like a warning. You should enjoy tonight, Ambassador. Do-Hyun frowned slightly. Why do you say that? Velkar looked back at the celebration. Because tomorrow, his voice became almost a whisper. The galaxy may begin asking whether humanity has become too important. Those words lingered in the air long after Velkar walked away. Do-Hyun turned back toward the endless line of Nexus gates stretching across space. Ships from every civilization crossed safely through the network humanity had built. They saw a symbol of unity, but he saw something else. Power. And history had taught him one painful lesson. The moment one civilization became indispensable, the others eventually began to fear it. Somewhere deep inside, Do-Hyun realized the celebration was already over. The first battle had not yet begun. He was addressing a complaint from the Vraxi Empire about shipping delays. The Vraxi representative demanded compensation and priority routing. Theos immediately agreed and ordered the Trade Commission to implement the changes within one cycle. Hun had made the exact same request 4 months ago. He was still waiting for a response. The session continued for another 6 hours. Hyan watched as species after species presented their concerns and received immediate attention. When a technical problem was mentioned, the council called in experts to solve it right away. When diplomatic disputes arose, mediators were assigned within minutes. The council was efficient and responsive, just not to humans. Finally, as the session was about to end, Tel Thielvos acknowledged the human delegation. The representatives from Earth may present their petition, he announced in a tone that suggested he was doing them a great favor. Jan stood and walked to the petitioner's platform. He carried a data tablet containing hundreds of pages of carefully prepared proposals. Honorable Council, he began, humanity requests fair consideration of our trade amendments. We propose adjusting the tariff structure that currently places human goods at a significant disadvantage. Before he could continue, a member from the Kelm Collective interrupted. These matters are trivial. The Council has more pressing business. Delvos nodded in agreement. Ambassador Hyun, your proposals have been noted. They will be reviewed when time permits. We must move on to critical matters now. Hyun felt something cold settle in his chest. Speaker Thielvos, these matters are critical to human colonies. We have citizens suffering from noted and logged. Thielvos cut him off. The human concerns will be addressed in the next review cycle. The next review cycle is 8 months away, Jan said, his voice steady despite his growing anger. Our people need help now. A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the alien assembly. One of the Vorten representatives, a being that looked like a floating mass of tentacles, spoke up. The humans always complain about timing. Perhaps if your species were more patient, you would understand how galactic governance works. More sounds of agreement echoed through the chamber. Han looked around at the assembled representatives and saw it clearly now. To them, humans were nothing more than an annoyance. A primitive species that had stumbled into space travel and now demanded attention they had not earned. In the Council's view, humanity should be grateful just to have a seat in this chamber. Even if that seat was in the back where no one could see them, Hyun made his decision in that moment. He closed his data tablet and looked directly at Speaker Thelvos. I see, he said quietly. Thank you for making your position clear. He turned and walked back to his delegation. Yunji looked at him with confusion. Ambassador, aren't you going to press the issue? No, Hyun said. He began gathering his materials. We're leaving. Leaving the session? Yunji asked. Leaving the council? Han replied. The noise in the chamber began to fade as other delegates noticed the humans packing their belongings. Hyun activated his communication link to all human embassies across council space. This is Ambassador Hyun. Humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Council effective immediately. All diplomatic staff are to close embassies and return to Earth-controlled space within 72 hours. All trade negotiations are cancelled. All cooperative projects are terminated. The chamber fell completely silent now. Every being present understood multiple languages through their translators, and they all heard Hyun's announcement clearly. Speaker Thelvos's crystalline form flickered with what might have been surprise. Ambassador, you cannot simply leave the council. There are procedures, protocols. We followed your procedures for 3 years. Han interrupted, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. We waited patiently. We submitted proper documentation. We respected every protocol. And in return, you treated us like children begging for scraps from the adult table. He picked up his case and looked around the chamber one last time. The council will regret teaching us that our voices don't matter here. You could have had our friendship. Instead, you chose contempt. Goodbye. The human delegation walked out of the chamber together, their footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Behind them, chaos began to erupt as council members started arguing about what had just happened. But Hun didn't look back. He had made his point. And now, humanity would make theirs, through absence rather than presence. Within hours, human ships across 70 star systems began their journey home. 3 weeks passed since the humans left, and most council members had already forgotten about the incident. Speaker Thielvos dismissed it as an emotional outburst from a young species that would soon come crawling back. The council continued, its business as usual, handling disputes and managing the vast network of civilizations under its authority. Then the reports started coming in. The first alert came from the Outer Rim Trading Consortium. Pirate attacks along the Serpentis route had increased by 40% in just 2 weeks. Ships were being raided, cargo was being stolen, and several vessels had gone missing completely. The consortium demanded immediate Council military intervention. The Council's military coordinator seemed confused by the request. "Our patrols have not changed," the coordinator reported. "We maintain the same presence we always have in that sector." But something had changed. The human merchant vessels that regularly traveled the Serpentis route were gone. Those ships had been armed and their crews trained in combat. Pirates had learned to avoid sectors where human traders operated because humans had a reputation for fighting back hard. Without those ships creating an unpredictable defensive presence, the pirates now operated freely. The second alert came from the medical supply distribution network. Hospital stations across 12 sectors reported critical shortages of basic medicines. The Council's logistics department investigated and discovered that humans had been managing almost a quarter of all medical supply chains. Human cargo ships had efficient routing systems, and human logistics experts had optimized delivery schedules. Without them, the entire system was falling apart. Medicines were piling up in some stations while others ran completely dry. The third alert was the most concerning. Communication networks across 3 sectors had gone completely dark. Council technicians rushed to investigate and found that the encryption protocols protecting the networks had failed. When they examined the systems more closely, they made a disturbing discovery. A human programmer named Dewan had installed the encryption years ago during a routine upgrade. He had mentioned in his reports that the system needed regular maintenance, but those reports had been filed away and forgotten. Now Dewan was back on Earth, and no one else understood his encryption well enough to fix it. Council economist Briel requested an emergency session to present his findings. He was a methodical being from a species that valued data above all else. His report took 6 hours to present, and with each passing minute, the assembled council members grew more uncomfortable. Humans, Fretel explained, had integrated themselves into galactic civilization far more deeply than anyone had realized. They handled 23% of medical distribution, 31% of rare element processing, and maintained critical infrastructure across hundreds of systems. More importantly, humans had a unique talent for identifying problems before they became critical and fixing them quietly without asking for credit or compensation. "Take the agricultural world of Thessia 7, Rectal said, displaying data on the central screen. "Human agronomists have been visiting that planet for 5 years. According to records, they were conducting research on soil composition. But look at these biological scans." The screen showed microscopic images of a parasitic organism. This parasite infects root systems and lies dormant for years before killing entire crops. The humans were not conducting research. They were treating an infection the Thessians did not even know existed. The Thessian representative stood up in alarm. "We were never informed of this parasite. The humans likely assumed you knew," Reptile replied. "They saw a problem and fixed it without being asked. That is what humans do." He pulled up more data. 3 weeks ago, the last human agronomist left the 7. 2 days ago, your agricultural report showed the first signs of widespread crop failure. The parasite is spreading unchecked. Without human intervention, you will face complete harvest failure within 3 months. The chamber erupted in concerned voices. Speaker Thielvos called for order, but the panic was already spreading. Representatives began checking reports from their own systems, looking for other places where humans might have been quietly keeping things running. On mining station Kepler 442, the extraction equipment had stopped working completely. The station's engineer had tried everything, but could not figure out what was wrong. A review of personnel records showed that a human woman named Bora had been stationed there until 3 weeks ago. She had maintained the mining equipment, which was a hybrid system combining technologies from 3 different civilizations. Bora had submitted detailed maintenance logs, but they were written in technical language that assumed a level of understanding no one else possessed. Without her, the station was dead in the water, and 17 industries that depended on its output were already feeling the impact. In the Orion Arm, hospital ships were reporting rising mortality rates. Dr. Tae Soo, a human trauma surgeon, had spent years training medical staff across multiple species. He had developed something he called adaptive surgery techniques that allowed doctors to operate on patients from different biological backgrounds. His methods had become so standard that no one remembered they had come from a human. Now Tessu was gone. and doctors were discovering that they could not safely perform cross-species surgeries without his guidance. Patients were dying on operating tables because medical staff had forgotten how to work without human expertise. The Velnir Commerce Guild presented the most damaging report. Their trade networks were collapsing. Humans had served as translators, mediators, and cultural liaison throughout the galaxy. It turned out that humans had an unusual gift for understanding different cultures and helping them communicate. Without human intermediaries, simple trade agreements were taking months instead of days. Misunderstandings were creating conflicts. Several trade partnerships had dissolved completely because neither side could understand what the other actually wanted. Speaker Theolvos listened to report after report, his crystalline form growing dimmer with each new revelation. The Council had not just lost a junior member species. They had lost the beings who held galactic civilization together at its most basic level. Humans were not the strongest or the smartest species, but they were the ones who noticed when things were breaking and fixed them before anyone else even saw the problem. "We need to bring them back," one council member declared. "Send envoys immediately. Offer them whatever they want." But Rectal shook his head slowly. "I do not think the humans will return easily," he said. "We have taught them that we do not value their contributions. Why would they help us now?" The chamber fell silent as the weight of that question settled over everyone present. The galaxy was falling apart, and the beings who could fix it had every reason to stay home and watch it burn. The collapse continued like a slow-motion disaster that no one could stop. Each day brought new reports of systems failing, operations grinding to a halt, and civilizations struggling with problems they did not understand. The Galactic Council had compared humanity's withdrawal to removing one small piece from a massive machine. They were learning that humans had not been one piece. They had been the oil that kept everything moving smoothly. On mining station Kepler 442, the situation had grown desperate. The station manager, a Kel named Throck, stared at the massive extraction equipment that had been silent for 2 weeks. The station employed 3,000 workers from 7 different species, and all of them were now sitting idle. Throck had called in engineers from across the sector, but none of them could solve the problem. The equipment itself was a masterpiece of hybrid engineering. The primary drill used Kelm technology. The processing system was Vorten design, and the transport mechanisms came from the Vraxi Empire. Each part worked on different principles and required different maintenance approaches. Bora, the human engineer who had been stationed here, had been the only person who understood all 3 systems well enough to keep them working together. Throck found Bora's maintenance logs and tried to follow them, but the instructions assumed knowledge he did not have. Recalibrate the phase variance between the drill matrix and the processing field. One entry read, "Throck did not even know what phase variance meant in this context." Another entry said, "Monitor the resonance frequency to prevent cascade failure in the transport system." What resonance frequency? Where was it monitored? Bora had known all of this instinctively, but she had never written it down in simple terms, because she assumed other engineers would understand. Without the mining station's output, 17 different industries were affected. Shipyards could not get the metals they needed. Construction projects across 4 sectors had stopped. Manufacturing plants were running out of raw materials. The economic impact was spreading like ripples in water, reaching further every day. In the Orion Arm, the hospital ship Mercy of Stars faced a crisis that made economic problems seem minor. Dr. TEU had trained most of the trauma surgeons who worked on Multiesi's medical vessels. His adaptive surgery techniques had revolutionized emergency medicine, allowing doctors to treat patients whose biology they had never studied. Now, a Thessian patient lay on an operating table with internal injuries from an accident. The lead surgeon, a skilled Vorten named Kless, knew Thessian anatomy and theory, but had never operated on one before. Under normal circumstances, Kless would use Tessu's adaptive approach, identifying common biological patterns and adjusting technique in real time. But the confidence to do that had come from TE's training, and Kless suddenly realized he had forgotten the fundamental principles. "Doctor, the patient is deteriorating," a nurse reported. Kless made a decision based on Vorten's surgical methods, and immediately knew it was wrong. The Thesian's biology responded differently than expected. By the time Kless realized the mistake, the patient had died. It was the 4th preventable death that week, on the Mercy of Stars alone. Across the Orion Arm, mortality rates in Multiesi's medical facilities had tripled. Dr. Sua, who had worked alongside Taisu for years, had been halfway back to Earth when she heard about the medical crisis. She wanted to turn around and help, but her orders were clear. All humans were to return home immediately. She recorded a message explaining Tessu's techniques in detail and transmitted it to every hospital ship she could reach. But a recording could not replace years of hands-on training. The Velnir Commerce Guild watched their centuries-old trade empire crumble in a matter of weeks. Guildmaster Vaughn had built his fortune on his ability to make deals between species that barely understood each other. He had always assumed his success came from his own brilliance, but now he understood the truth. His human assistants had been doing most of the real work. A simple negotiation between the Kel Collective and the Thesian Agricultural Union had turned into a diplomatic nightmare. The Kel representatives kept making what they thought were reasonable offers, but the Thesians were becoming increasingly offended. Vor could see that both sides wanted to make a deal, but they were talking past each other. Cultural misunderstandings were piling up, and neither side could see where they were going wrong. Born tried to mediate, but he did not have the cultural knowledge to bridge the gap. He needed someone like Jinho, a human translator who had worked for the guild for 6 years. Jinho had an instinct for understanding what beings really meant versus what they actually said. He could sense when a phrase that seemed neutral in one culture was deeply insulting in another. Without him, Vaughn was essentially blind to the subtle currents that determined whether negotiations succeeded or failed. The deal fell apart after 3 weeks of talks. Both sides left angry, and the Thessians announced they would no longer work with Real intermediaries. Vor received similar reports from guild offices across the galaxy. Human translators, mediators, and cultural advisors had vanished, and without them, the careful web of relationships that powered galactic trade was tearing apart. Speaker Thielvos called an emergency council session to address the growing crisis. The chamber was filled with angry voices demanding solutions. Representatives shouted blame at each other, while Thelvos tried to maintain order. "We must send diplomats to Earth immediately," one representative demanded. "Offer them concessions, trade benefits, anything they want. We should not negotiate from weakness," another countered. "The humans will return when they realize they need the council more than we need them." Rectile stood and waited for silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. "We are not listening," he said. "We are making the same mistake again. We are talking about what we want and what we need. Has anyone asked what the humans want?" The chamber fell silent. In 3 weeks of crisis, not one council member had considered that question. "They told us what they wanted," Fredel continued. "They wanted to be heard. They wanted their concerns taken seriously. They wanted to be treated as equals. We refused all of that, and now we are surprised they will not help us." He gestured at the chaos visible on the data screen surrounding them. "This is not a problem we can solve with trade offers or diplomatic pressure. The humans are teaching us a lesson, and we will keep suffering until we learn it." Across the galaxy in a small office on Earth, Ambassador Hyan read the latest reports from Council Space. Hunji stood beside him looking troubled. "Sir, people are dying because we left," she said quietly. "Shouldn't we help them?" Hyan looked at her with tired eyes. "We tried to help them for 3 years, Yunji. They did not want our help. They wanted us to be quiet and grateful for whatever scraps they threw our way." He turned back to his screens. "Now they will learn what they lost. Only then will they be ready to listen." 2 months after humanity's withdrawal, the Galactic Council sent their first diplomatic mission to Earth. 5 ambassadors from different species arrived at the United Earth Government headquarters in Geneva, expecting to be received with the respect due to council representatives. Instead, they were made to wait in a lobby for 3 hours before anyone acknowledged them. When Ambassador Hana finally appeared, she did not apologize for the delay. She led them to a small conference room, not the grand diplomatic hall where council envoys were traditionally received. The message was clear. Earth was no longer following council protocols. The head of the delegation, a Vorton named Selvik, tried to take control of the meeting immediately. "The Galactic Council demands that humanity return to council space and resume its duties. Your absence is causing significant disruption." Hana looked at him with an expression that might have been amusement. "The council demands," she repeated. "I think you misunderstand your position here. You are guests on Earth, not representatives of an authority we recognize." Selvik's tentacles twitched with irritation. "Humanity is bound by the treaties of integration. You cannot simply ignore your obligations." "We can, and we did," Hana replied. Read the treaty carefully. It allows any member species to withdraw from Council participation at any time. We followed the rules perfectly. Another envoy, a Kel named Thoris, leaned forward. Be reasonable. Your people are needed. Systems are failing. People are dying. Surely you do not want that on your conscience. Where was your conscience when human colonists on Proxima Station were dying from medical supply shortages? Hana asked. We begged the Council for help for 4 months. We were told to be patient. She stood and walked to the window looking out over the city. Dr. Sua watched children die while waiting for the Council to approve emergency supply shipments. Engineer Bora worked 18-hour days keeping mining equipment running and never received even a simple thank you. We gave everything to the Council, and the Council gave us contempt in return. We can change that, Selvik said quickly. The Council is prepared to offer humanity improved trade terms, better territorial allocations, even a seat on the Security Committee. You had 3 years to offer those things, Hana said without turning around. You chose to wait until you were desperate. That tells me you have not learned anything yet. The meeting ended with no agreement. The Council envoys left Earth frustrated and confused. They had come prepared to negotiate from a position of strength. But somehow, the humans had turned the entire situation around. Reports of their failure spread quickly through Council space, and panic began to set in. The Council decided to solve their problems without human help. If humans were the only beings who could maintain hybrid systems, then the Council would create training programs to teach other species. If human cultural mediators were essential, then the Council would develop new diplomatic protocols that did not require them. It was an ambitious plan that showed the Council had completely missed the point. The automated patrol system was the first disaster. Council engineers developed an artificial intelligence to replace human peacekeepers along the trade routes. The AI was programmed with detailed threat assessment protocols and given control of military drones. It was deployed along the Serpentis route with great confidence. 3 days later, the AI identified a civilian transport vessel as a pirate ship based on outdated registration codes. Before anyone could intervene, the drones destroyed the transport, killing all 200 passengers aboard. The incident caused outrage across multiple species and led to immediate demands that the AI system be shut down. The second disaster came when a Vraxi engineer named Kelton attempted to repair the mining equipment on Kepler 442. Kelton studied Bora's maintenance logs carefully and believed he understood the hybrid systems. He made what seemed like a logical adjustment to the processing field, trying to compensate for the drill's power fluctuations. The explosion could be seen from orbit. 47 workers died instantly, and the mining station suffered catastrophic damage that would take years to repair. Investigation showed that Kelton had fundamentally misunderstood how the 3 different technologies interacted. Bora had known that the processing field's instability was not a problem to fix, but a feature that helped balance the other systems. That knowledge came from years of experience working with all 3 technologies, something that could not be learned from reading logs. The medical disaster was the worst. A Council research team developed an AI assistant to help doctors perform cross-species surgery. The AI was trained on thousands of medical procedures and programmed with adaptive algorithms based on Taisu's published papers. It was installed in the Mercy of SARS, with promises that it would save lives. During its first week of operation, the AI poisoned an entire ward of patients. The system had correctly identified treatment protocols for each species individually, but it had not understood how medications would interact when patients were housed in the same environment. Humans had an intuitive grasp of complex system interactions that the AI simply could not replicate. By the time doctors realized what was happening, 18 patients were dead. While the Council flailed desperately, something else was happening in the shadows. A human named Sun Min had stayed behind when the others withdrew. He had been a junior analyst at the Council, barely noticed by the senior representatives. Now he moved through Council space, documenting everything with careful precision. Sun Min recorded the failures in the panic, but he also recorded something else. He showed how many small problems humans had fixed every day, without anyone noticing. A communication error here, a scheduling conflict there, a cultural misunderstanding, prevented before it escalated. Humans had been performing thousands of tiny miracles daily, and the galaxy had taken every single one for granted. His reports were detailed and damning. He showed Council representatives their own internal documents, messages where they had dismissed human concerns or mocked human requests for help. He played back recordings of meetings where humans had warned about potential problems, only to be ignored. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Some council members began to understand. Fractile was among them, and he gathered others who were willing to admit the truth. They formed a small group that met secretly, trying to figure out how to fix what had been broken, but they were a minority. Most of the council still refused to accept responsibility. Speaker Thelvos held firm in his position. "The humans are being childish," he declared in one session. "They will come back when they realize they need us more than we need them. We simply must wait them out." But they were not waiting out the humans. They were bleeding. Every day brought new reports of failures, accidents, and deaths. The careful systems that had kept galactic civilization running smoothly were breaking down one after another. And on Earth, humanity watched and waited, knowing that the real negotiation could only begin when the Council finally understood what they had lost. The Galactic Council, which had maintained unity for 12,000 years, began to fracture. 3 distinct factions emerged, each with different ideas about how to handle the human crisis. The division ran so deep that some believed the Council itself might collapse. The traditionalists rallied around Speaker Thelvos. They represented the oldest civilizations, species that had been part of the Council since its founding. To them, humanity's withdrawal was an insult that could not be tolerated. They argued that showing weakness now would encourage other species to make similar demands. "We have maintained order in this galaxy for thousands of years," Thelvos declared during one heated session. "We will not be dictated to by a species that only discovered faster than light traveled 2 centuries ago. The humans will return when they grow tired of isolation. Until then, we adapt and overcome." The traditionalists blocked every attempt to send new diplomatic missions to Earth. They refused to acknowledge that the Council had done anything wrong. In their view, humans were simply being difficult, and the proper response was to wait until they came to their senses. The second faction called themselves the Pragmatists. Led by Rectal, they looked at the situation through cold logic. The numbers did not lie. Galactic civilization was collapsing, and every day of human absence made things worse. Pride was a luxury they could not afford. "We made mistakes," Rectal told his faction during a private meeting. "We can argue about whose fault it was later. Right now, we need the humans back, and we need them back immediately. Whatever it takes, whatever they want, we give it to them." The Pragmatists began gathering support for a new treaty that would give humans everything they had originally asked for, and more. Equal representation on all council committees, guaranteed response times for human concerns, and formal recognition of human contributions to galactic stability. They worked tirelessly, trying to build enough support to override the traditionalists. But it was the third faction that posed the greatest danger. The opportunists saw the chaos as a chance to seize power. They were led by a coalition of species that had always resented the Council's established order. Now, with everything in turmoil, they saw their moment. The opportunists had a different strategy. They wanted to keep the humans away. While they consolidated control over the Council's fracturing systems, they spread rumors that humans were demanding unreasonable concessions. They sabotaged diplomatic efforts and blamed the failures on human stubbornness. Their goal was to use the crisis to reshape the Council with themselves at the top. On Earth, Director J. Rim watched the Council's internal struggles with careful attention. She ran the United Earth government's External Affairs Division, and her job was to determine when and how humanity should re-engage with the galaxy. The information Sun Min sent from Council space helped her understand the political landscape perfectly. "They are fighting among themselves," she told the Earth Assembly during a closed session. "The longer we stay away, the weaker the Council becomes. But we are also receiving requests from individual species and independent colonies. These requests were different from the Council's demands. They came from beings who had always treated humans with respect. A research station that humans had helped build asked for technical assistance. A small colony facing a medical emergency requested a human doctor. An independent trade consortium offered fair partnership terms. Director Drem created a new policy. Earth would respond to requests based on how those species had treated humanity in the past. Those who had shown respect received help. Those who had dismissed or insulted humans were politely refused. The message was clear. Humanity would help its friends, but the galaxy could no longer take human aid for granted. Captain Yoon commanded a small medical ship called the Healing Hand. He received orders to respond to an emergency on a mining colony called Far Reach. The colony was independent, not part of council space, and their foreman had always traded fairly with human merchants. When the healing hand arrived at Far Reach, they found a disaster in progress. A chemical leak had poisoned the air systems, and half the colony's population was sick. The local doctors were overwhelmed and did not have the right equipment. Dr. Miji led the medical team. She worked for 72 hours straight treating patients and training the local doctors in techniques they had never seen before. When she finally took a break, the colony's foreman, a Kelm named Dorak, thanked her with tears in his eyes. The council would have taken weeks to send help, if they sent anyone at all. Dorak said, "You came within hours of our call. You treated our traders fairly when others did not." Mimji replied, "We remember our friends." News of these selective interventions spread quickly through the galaxy. Species realized that Earth was not refusing to help everyone. They were simply refusing to help the Council, and those who had supported the Council's treatment of humanity. This created a new dynamic that terrified the Council leadership. Independent colonies began forming direct relationships with Earth, bypassing the Council entirely. Trade agreements were signed between humanity and individual species. Defense pacts were established. Cultural exchanges were arranged. Humanity was building a parallel network of alliances that had nothing to do with Council authority. The Council realized they were not just losing human help, they were losing their position as the center of galactic civilization. If this continued, the Council would become irrelevant. The opportunist faction saw their chance slipping away and decided to take dramatic action. They hired mercenary forces and sent them to raid a human colony. The plan was to create a crisis that would force Earth to negotiate. They calculated that humans would be so desperate to protect their citizens that they would agree to return on the Council's terms. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The attack hit Colony Arcturus, a peaceful settlement on the edge of human space. The mercenaries struck at night, targeting civilian areas. By the time local defense forces could respond, 300 people were dead, including many children. The mercenaries escaped before Earth's military could arrive, but they left behind evidence of who had hired them. When the evidence was presented to the Council, the opportunist faction tried to deny involvement, but Sunmen had documented everything. He had recordings of their planning sessions, financial transfers showing payment to the mercenaries, and communications that proved the attack was deliberate. The traditionalists and pragmatists united in their fury. The opportunist leaders were arrested, and their faction collapsed overnight, but the damage was done. Earth now had a reason to see the Council as not just dismissive, but actively hostile. On Earth, the government held an emergency session. Military commanders demanded immediate retaliation. Admiral Nari stood before the assembly with barely controlled rage. "They killed our children," she said, her voice shaking. "They attacked civilians. Give me the word, and we will show them why attacking humanity is a fatal mistake." Director Jim listened to the demands for war. She understood the anger. She felt it herself. But she also saw an opportunity. "No," she said firmly. "We will not give them war. We will give them something much worse. We will teach them exactly what they lost when they drove us away. And when they finally understand, they will beg us to return." The room fell silent. The military commanders wanted blood, but they trusted Jim's judgment. She had guided Earth's policy perfectly so far. "Prepare the fleets," Jim ordered. "Not for conquest, but for demonstration. The Council is about to learn what humanity is truly capable of." The attack on Colony Arcturus changed everything. For 3 months, humanity had responded to the Council's crisis with measured restraint. They had quietly withdrawn, selectively helped their friends, and let the galaxy learn its lesson through natural consequences. But the death of 300 civilians, including children, demanded a different response. Earth's military fleets mobilized with frightening speed. Within 72 hours of the attack, human warships appeared in 4 different sectors simultaneously. The galaxy watched in shock as humanity revealed capabilities no one had known they possessed. Captain Yun now commanded the EFS Indomitable, one of humanity's newest warships. He stood on the bridge watching tactical displays that showed something that made Council military observers deeply uncomfortable. The displays showed detailed maps of every Council military installation, every trade route, every communication hub, and every strategic resource in Council space. "How long have we had this intelligence?" Yun's executive officer asked quietly. "Years," Yun replied. "Humans gather information about everything. It is what we do. We map. We analyze. We understand systems. The council assumed we were just curious. They never realized we were building a complete picture of their entire civilization. The first target was a mercenary base in the Korvax sector. Intelligence showed that the mercenaries who attacked Arcturus operated from there. The base was heavily defended, hidden in an asteroid field, and considered impenetrable. The Indomitable arrived with 3 other human ships. They did not negotiate or issue warnings. Within 20 minutes, the base was destroyed. The mercenaries never even had time to launch their fighters. Human weapons struck with precision that seemed impossible. Every shot found its target. Every missile hit exactly where it was supposed to. The second base fell 12 hours later. Then the third. By the end of the first week, every mercenary organization that had participated in the Arcturus attack had been eliminated. But humanity did not stop there. Admiral Nari commanded the operation from Earth. She had argued for this response, and now she executed it with cold efficiency. Human fleets swept through regions where pirates and raiders operated. These criminals had flourished in the chaos following humanity's withdrawal. Now they learned that humans could be as effective at destruction as they had been at building. The galaxy witnessed something they had never imagined. Humans, fought with the same creativity and problem-solving ability they applied to peacetime challenges. They did not rely on superior firepower or advanced technology. Instead, they used tactics that confused and overwhelmed their enemies. One pirate fleet tried to hide in a nebula's sensor-dampening clouds. Human ships released specialized drones that mapped the entire nebula in hours, finding the pirates and destroying them before they could escape. Another group of raiders built a fortress on an uninhabited moon. Confident in their defensive positions, human engineers identified a geological weakness and triggered a controlled moonquake that collapsed the fortress from within. But what truly frightened Council observers was not the military action itself. It was the complete intelligence network that humanity revealed. Humans knew where every threat was located. They knew which species supplied the mercenaries, which council members had looked the other way when pirates operated in their territory, and which corporations had profited from the chaos. Sunmen's reports from inside council space became even more valuable. He provided real-time intelligence about council military positions and political reactions. The council realized that one junior analyst had been feeding Earth complete information for months, and they had never even noticed him. After 2 weeks of military operations, Admiral Nari contacted the Galactic Council directly. Her message was broadcast to every council chamber and every government in council space. "The beings who attacked Colony Arcturus are dead," she announced. "Every mercenary base that harbored them has been destroyed. Every pirate organization that profited from the chaos you created has been eliminated. We did in 2 weeks what your military could not do in 2 years." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "But we are not done. We have identified 47 council members who knew about the Arcturus attack in advance and did nothing to stop it. We have evidence of 17 corporations that funded the mercenaries. We have records of every corrupt official who helped pirates operate in council space." The tactical display behind her showed a star map with hundreds of locations marked. These are council military installations, communication hubs, and strategic resources. We know where everything is. We know how your systems work. We know your weaknesses. The map zoomed in, showing incredible detail. We could your entire civilization in less than 3 weeks if we chose to. Not through conquest, but through precision strikes at critical infrastructure. The threat was clear, but Nari's next words were even more powerful. "We will not do this. We will not become the monsters you feared. But you need to understand something. For 3 years, you treated us as inferior. You assumed we were weak because we asked for help instead of demanding it. You thought we were simple because we tried to solve problems peacefully. You were wrong about everything," she said coldly. "We are not weak. We are patient. We are not simple. We are complex enough to see problems you cannot even imagine. And we are not inferior. We are the beings who held your civilization together while you took all the credit." The council chambers erupted in chaos. Some members demanded immediate military response to the human threat. Others called for emergency negotiations. The traditionalist faction led by Speaker Thelvos finally began to fracture. Even the most stubborn members could not ignore the reality anymore. Fractal and the pragmatists saw their opportunity. They pushed through emergency legislation that removed several traditionalist leaders from power. The political landscape of the council shifted dramatically in just days. On Earth, Director Jim watched the council's reaction carefully. The military demonstration had achieved its goal. The council now understood that humanity could be a terrible enemy. But that was only half of the message. She sent a second communication to the council. This one very different in tone. "We do not want to be your enemy," she said. "We never did. We wanted to be your partners, your friends, your equals. You refuse to see us that way, and many people have died because of your pride. But there is still a path forward," Jim continued. "We will return to the galaxy, not as subjects, not as junior members, but as equals. We will help rebuild what has been broken. We will share our knowledge and our skills, but the relationship will be different. You will listen when we speak. You will value what we contribute, and you will never again make the mistake of taking humanity for granted." She outlined terms for a new treaty. Humans would have full council representation proportional to their contributions. Any species could request human assistance, but disrespect would result in immediate withdrawal. Cultural exchange programs would be established, so other species could learn how humans thought and worked. "You have 1 week to respond," Jim said. "Accept these terms and we rebuild together. Reject them, and we will leave you to fix your own problems, while we build something new with the species who value us." The message ended, and across the galaxy, beings waited to see what the council would do. The choice was simple but profound. They could swallow their pride and accept humanity as equals, or they could continue their decline without the beings who had quietly kept everything working. For Speaker Thelvos, the crystalline being who had dismissed human concerns for years, the moment of decision was painful. His light dimmed as he finally accepted the truth. Pride had nearly destroyed everything the council had built. It was time to choose survival over ego. 6 months after humanity's withdrawal, a new treaty was drafted in Seoul, South Korea. The choice of location was deliberate and symbolic. For 12,000 years, the Galactic Council had written every major treaty in their orbital chambers, imposing their rules on member species. This time, the Council came to Earth as petitioners, not as authorities. The conference room overlooked the Han River. Ambassador Hyun sat at the head of the table, the same man who had walked out of the council chambers with quiet dignity. Across from him sat representatives from every major council faction. Speaker Thelvos was there, his crystalline form noticeably dimmer than before. Fractal sat beside him, looking tired but hopeful. The document on the table was written in Korean first, then translated into council standard. That detail mattered more than most council members wanted to admit. It showed who held power. "Now, let me be clear about something," Hyun began. "We are not writing this treaty because we need the council. We have proven we can thrive without you. Independent colonies are forming direct relationships with Earth. We have trade partners who value us. We have friends who respect us." He looked directly at Telvos. "We are writing this treaty because we believe the galaxy is better when we work together. But that only works if everyone is treated as an equal." The treaty terms were comprehensive. Humanity would receive seats on every major council committee proportional to their contributions. That meant humans would have significant voice in decisions about trade, security, medical policy, and infrastructure. Any council vote that affected human colonies would require human approval. It was a level of power that no junior member species had ever held. But the treaty went beyond political representation. It established the Human Integration Corps, a new organization dedicated to teaching other species how humans thought and worked. The council had learned that they could not simply replace human expertise with their own people. They needed to understand why humans were so effective at solving problems. Teacher Mi would lead the education division. She had spent years working with multi-species medical teams and understood how to bridge different ways of thinking. Her job was to develop programs that taught other species the patterns of human problem-solving. Humans see connections that others miss. She explained to the council representatives, "We look at a broken system and see how all the parts interact. We notice small problems before they become big ones. These are skills that can be taught, but only if you are willing to learn." Engineer Jinhyo would head infrastructure training. The disasters with automated systems and failed repairs had shown that reading maintenance logs was not enough. Engineers from other species needed hands-on experience working with humans, learning not just what to do, but how to think about complex systems. Dr. Suo would oversee medical knowledge transfer. The deaths from preventable medical errors had shaken the entire galaxy's healthcare system. She would establish training programs at every major medical facility, ensuring that Taisu's adaptive surgery techniques became standard practice for all doctors. The council agreed to every term. They had no choice. But more importantly, they finally understood why these terms were necessary. The galaxy had seen what happened when humans were gone. No one wanted to experience that again. The treaty also addressed the Arcturus attack directly. The council officially condemned the attack and established a reparations fund for the victims' families. More significantly, the treaty created new oversight mechanisms to prevent council members from ever again hiring mercenaries to threaten another species. When the signing ceremony took place, it was broadcast across the galaxy. Beings from 200 different worlds watched as their representatives affixed their marks to a document that fundamentally changed how galactic civilization would operate. Ambassador Hun was the last to sign. He used a traditional Korean seal, pressing it firmly onto the document beside his signature. The red ink stood out against the white paper, a mark that could not be ignored or forgotten. "This treaty is more than words on paper," Jan said during his address. "It is a promise that the galaxy will be different. Those who contribute will be valued, those who help will be respected, and those who quietly keep everything running will finally be seen." The new Galactic Council convened for the first time 3 weeks later. The chamber had been redesigned. The old arrangement with senior species at the center and junior members pushed to the edges was gone. Now the seating was arranged in concentric circles, with rotation, ensuring that no species was permanently relegated to the back. When the human delegation entered, they walked to seats in the third row from the center, not the back row, where they had spent 3 years being ignored. Not the front row either, because humans had not asked for special treatment. They had asked for fairness, and that was what they received. Speaker Thielvos opened the session with an acknowledgement that must have hurt his pride deeply. "This council failed humanity," he said, his crystalline voice clear across the chamber. "We dismissed their concerns. We ignored their contributions. We treated them as inferior when they were anything but. Many beings died because of our arrogance, and that responsibility falls on us." He paused, his light flickering with what humans had learned to recognize as shame. The humans could have watched us collapse. They could have built their own empire while we struggled. Instead, they offered us this chance to rebuild together. That generosity teaches us more about their character than 3 years of dismissal taught us about ours. The session proceeded smoothly. Human representatives presented concerns about trade regulations affecting 3 colonies. Unlike before, their presentation was heard attentively. Questions were asked respectfully. Within 2 hours, a committee was formed to address the issues. With human participation guaranteed, it was a small victory, but it represented everything that had changed. Across the galaxy, human ships began returning to their old routes. Not all at once, but gradually. Dr. Tu went back to the Mercy of Stars, where the medical staff welcomed him with tears of relief. Engineer Bora returned to mining station Kepler 442, where the workers gave her an ovation that lasted 10 minutes. Captain Yoon's medical ship resumed emergency response duties, saving lives across multiple sectors. But not everything returned to how it was before. Humans no longer worked quietly in the background, unacknowledged and unappreciated. Other species had learned to recognize human contributions and express gratitude for them. Cultural exchange programs brought alien students to Earth and human teachers to distant worlds. Understanding grew where ignorance had once festered. 5 years after the withdrawal, Ambassador Hein retired from diplomatic service. On his last day, he stood in the council chamber one final time. Representatives from across the galaxy had come to honor him. The man who had walked away when walking away seemed impossible. Speaker Thevos approached him privately after the ceremony. The crystalline being had aged noticeably, his light less bright than before. "I owe you an apology," Delvos said quietly. "I owed it to you 5 years ago, but I was too proud to give it." Han looked at the being who had dismissed humanity so casually. He could have held on to his anger, but he chose a different path. "You gave it to me in the only way that mattered," Hyun replied. "You changed. You helped change the council. That is worth more than words." "We were fools," Theos said. "Yes," Yen agreed, "but wise enough to learn. That is all we ever asked for." They stood together looking out at the council chamber, watching representatives from hundreds of worlds working together, with newfound respect for each other's contributions. It was not perfect. Old prejudices did not vanish overnight, and conflict still arose. But the foundation was different now, built on recognition and respect rather than hierarchy and dismissal. Hun thought about the 300 people who died at Colony Arcturus. The price of change had been terrible, paid in blood and grief. But their deaths had not been meaningless. They had forced the galaxy to confront truths it had been avoiding for centuries. As he left the chamber for the last time, Hun passed a group of young humans who were just beginning their diplomatic careers. They walked with confidence, knowing they would be heard when they spoke. They carried themselves as equals, not as supplicants begging for scraps of attention. That was humanity's real victory. Not the treaty or the political power or the recognition. It was the knowledge that future generations would never have to prove their worth, the way his generation had. They would be seen from the beginning, valued from the start. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and humanity would make sure it never forgot.